Swami Satyamanandaji, dear guests, devotees, members, and friends, good evening to you all. On behalf of the Vivekananda Vedanta Society of British Columbia, I welcome you and thank you one and all for kindly responding to our invitation and being part of our festivities this evening. 122 years ago, on July 25th, 1893, the dynamic modern-day prophet from India, Swami Vivekananda, arrived aboard the Canadian Pacific liner called Empress of India. As the first ambassador of Hinduism to the West, he revealed the priceless truths contained in the Vedanta philosophy, that is, universalism and harmony of religions. And thus, he changed forever the thinking of many Westerners in regard to spirituality. Thus, Swami Vivekananda's arrival is an historical event, and his admirers in Vancouver feel especially honored since he first set foot on North American soil here in Vancouver, British Columbia. Swami Vivekananda was born as Narendranath Datta on January 12, 1863 in Calcutta, India. The day was Makar Sankranti, the highly auspicious day in Hindu calendar. His parents were Vishwanath Datta, a prominent lawyer at Calcutta, and Bhuvaneshwari Devi, a highly cultured and pious lady. Narendranath demonstrated exceptional all-around abilities even as a boy, like proficiency in athletics, talent in music, facility in studies due to keen powers of understanding and a prodigious memory. He received a Western education and was considered a genius. But even from an early age, he was haunted by the question of God. Was there a God? And if so, what was he like? He searched persistently but in vain to find a person who could say that he has seen God, until he met Sri Ramakrishna, the great 19th century saint of India. Sri Ramakrishna replied that not only he had seen God, but that he could show God to Naren as well. Thus, Sri Ramakrishna, the simple rustic temple priest, taught the college-educated rationalist and in less than 5 years trained him to perfection. Sri Ramakrishna passed away in 1886 and left Narendranath, who was just 23-year-old at that time, to execute his mission. Narendranath embraced a monastic way of life, became the leader of a selected group of men with whom he founded a monastery at Baranagar in West Bengal. Taking the name of Vivekananda, he traveled extensively throughout India and observed her problems firsthand. He felt very keenly for the millions of common people living in a state of ignorance, starvation, and helplessness, and longed to find solution to their problems. Drawn to Swami Vivekananda by his bright looks and inspiring talks, the Maharajas of Mysore and of Khetri and a few young men of Madras raised funds to send him to the forthcoming Parliament of Religions in Chicago, USA, in order to represent Hinduism. At first, Swami Vivekananda was very reluctant to embark on such a monumental journey, but two significant events convinced him to proceed. Firstly, it was the vision of his master Sri Ramakrishna on the waters near Kanyakumari at the southern tip of India, beckoning him in the direction of North America. And secondly, the express blessings of Sri Sharada Devi, the Holy Mother, wife and spiritual heir to Sri Ramakrishna. Thus, realizing his mission, he came with the hope in his heart that something good might come out of it for his beloved country, India, which he loved so dearly. Swami Vivekananda's journey to the West began in Bombay. Departing in June 1893, he traveled by the steamer called Peninsular, visiting Colombo, Penang. Penang is an island off the west coast of Malay Peninsula. Then Singapore and Hong Kong. From Hong Kong, he went to the ports of Nagasaki and Kobe in Japan. Then Swami went overland to the cities of Osaka, Kyoto, Tokyo, and finally to Yokohama. On July 10, 1893, just prior to his departure to North America, Swami Vivekananda wrote a lengthy letter from Yokohama to his friend and sponsor Alasinga Perumal in South India, which describes in some detail and with considerable animation his travels since leaving India. It appears that Swami Vivekananda took every opportunity to make side trips and engage in sightseeing in each of the ports he visited thus far. The ship Empress of India carrying Swami Vivekananda arrived in Vancouver at 7 p.m. on Tuesday, July 25, 1893. The ship docked roughly at the point where the Canada Place stands today. There were two separate newspapers in Vancouver at that time, the Daily World and the Daily News Advertiser. The July 26th edition of both these newspapers note the ship's arrival time as 7 p.m. on the same evening. This can be taken as exact moment when Swami Vivekananda first set foot on the continent of North America. Vancouver was the starting point for Swami Vivekananda's historical visit to the West. From here, he traveled by the Canadian Pacific Railway to Winnipeg, where he stayed overnight as the archives of the Manitoba Free Press show, and then from there to Chicago to attend the Parliament of Religions. The rest is history. There's a prayer in Sanskrit that says, "Dear Lord, please be the instrument by which, before I depart, I'm able to repay this world goodness in a measure more generous than I had received." Swamiji's life did exactly that. In the course of a short life of 39 years, of which only 10 were devoted to public activities, and that too in the midst of acute physical suffering, Swamiji left for the posterity an abundance of spiritual legacy, for which he is loved and revered in the East and West alike. It's hard to imagine a life more fulfilled and better spent. Now, we are greatly honored this evening by the presence with us of our chief guest, Swami Tattvamayananda Ji, the head of the Vedanta Society of Northern California, San Francisco. Before I request our chief guest to deliver his lecture, I'd be honored to do a proper introduction. Swami Tattvamayananda is currently the minister in charge of the Vedanta Society of Northern California in San Francisco. He had traditional training in Hindu scriptures, Sanskrit, and Vedic literature from his early days. He served in various centers in Ramakrishna Order in India as editor, publisher, and teacher of Sanskrit Advaitic texts such as Sri Shankaracharya's commentaries on the Prasthanatraya and Indian philosophy. Before coming to the United States in January 2012, he was teaching Sanskrit, Vedantic scriptures, and Indian philosophy at the training center in Belur Math, the headquarters of the Ramakrishna Mission, Calcutta, India. He is frequently invited for lectures on yoga, Vedanta, and traditional Hindu scriptures. His classes and lectures are available on YouTube and on Vedanta Society of Northern California website. Now we have arrived to the point we all have been anxiously waiting for. So I would now request Swamiji to deliver his lecture. The title Swamiji has chosen for his talk this evening is Swami Vivekananda's Message for the 21st Century. Swamiji, please.
Surupaya Swamini Tapaharini. First of all, I must express my deep sense of gratitude and a sense of fulfillment to have been invited for this very important and historically very significant event, though I would have had the privilege to be here more than 2 years back, but due to some obligations I couldn't make it. So I feel I'm participating in a very important event which I was looking for the last few years. Now the topic before us is Swami Vivekananda's message for the 21st century. Now, what was Swamiji's message, and in what way is it relevant to our times? See, we all know that Swamiji came to this place, Vancouver, in 1893, a few months before the Parliament of Religion began, and he practically made history and added a golden chapter not only to the history of India's culture and tradition and spiritual heritage, but also made a momentous contribution to the very concept of religion and spirituality. If you look at today's situation and compare it with Swamiji's time when Swamiji came here, there is one great change. On the one hand, there are many unpleasant things going on in the name of religion and God, frequently bringing a very bad name to both. But still, on the other hand, there is a silver line. Today, educated people, cultured, enlightened people always try to look upon religion as something universal, as a universal spiritual urge for liberation, for living a better life in this world and making this earth, this world, a better place for man to live in. Today, if you address an enlightened audience and tell people that my religion is the only true religion in the world, all other religions false, nobody will take that teacher or that speaker seriously. That is a unique change that has taken place during the last 123 years since Swamiji's appearance here. I do not say, and it may appear to be a bit of an exaggeration to say that it was Swami Vivekananda who was exclusively responsible for bringing about this change. I won't go that far. In a way, America, this unique socio-economic political experiment, which is a unique event in the history of political science and history of nation state, this America was the first nation to provide a platform for bringing together the delegates and representatives of all existing world religious traditions, all existing faith systems. As I was mentioning sometime earlier, there have been two experiments before 1893 in the history of religious thought to bring together all faith systems on one platform. The first attempt was made in the 2nd century BC by Ashoka the Great, who was a great emperor in India, who embraced Buddhism and became a prophet of non-violence, became a prophet of peace, universal peace. He made an attempt, but historically, as it happened, that was before many of the present world religions had come into existence. So naturally, it was confined to the religious aspirations of Indian subcontinent. Then, during the time of Akbar the Great, an emperor who belonged to the Mughal dynasty, there was an attempt to bring together the teachings of different religious aspirations. In fact, his attempt is sometimes called Deen Ilahi, which means he, as an emperor, he invited Portuguese missionaries who were then very active in Goa, and many Hindu pandits and Hindu saints and philosophers from Benares and other places in India, and also Sufi scholars. He brought them all together, and also from other religious traditions of India. He tried to put together the teachings of all existing religious traditions. But then it was some kind of an eclecticism, and so it did not really take off. But in 1893, a World Parliament of Religion was held as part of the 400th anniversary of Columbus' discovery of America. And that was the first time that all existing world religions and their teachers and delegates came together and tried to create a common platform for the spiritual aspirations of humanity. And incidentally, Swami Vivekananda, representing Hinduism and in a broader sense the spiritual heritage of the Orient, was the most celebrated speaker and delegate who appeared on the platform. And Vivekananda worked for 4 years in this country, then went back to India in 1897. He landed in Colombo, and a few days after landing in Colombo, he made a very interesting speech, which in a way explains why Vivekananda could create such an impact on the world stage of religious aspirations. There's an interesting sentence which Swamiji says, if Manu returned today, he won't be bewildered, he won't find himself in a strange land. This is a sentence from Vivekananda's first address in Colombo in 1897 January, most probably 15th or 16th of January. Now what did he mean by that? He says, if Manu returned today means 1897, Manu was the ancient lawgiver who might have lived maybe in 4th millennium BC, 4,000 years before Christ. He was the lawgiver of Vedic heritage and Vedic culture. Vivekananda says, if Manu had returned in 1897 to India, he would have seen the same Vedic culture, Vedic heritage still flourishing in India. And he won't be bewildered, he won't be surprised. Now the question is, what does it mean? Today, if you look at India's culture, India's spiritual heritage, you find there is a continuity of religious tradition, spiritual tradition in India. If you want to study about the ancient Egyptian civilization, you have to go to a library or a historical museum, and you have to study different excavated items, mummies and different items connected with the different dynasties of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, Ramses II, Ramses I, and so on. But there is nothing that is alive that you can see or interact with that is related to the ancient Egyptian culture. If you want to study about the Sumerian or the ancient Greek or any of the ancient civilizations, they were certainly great civilizations, but they have practically vanished from the face of earth. They exist in historical museums and books. Of course, the great legacy of the Greco-Roman heritage is still present in America, in Canada, in European countries today. The idea of perfectionism, the idea of self-reliance, hard work, social order, justice and fair play, many of these great values which had their origin in ancient Greece, in the Athenian nation-state, city-state, which again flourished during Roman Empire, which was again inherited by different nation-states of Europe, and later on the United States and Canada and many other countries, which were continuation of the European national culture, national heritage. They are still present, but they have been completely altered, they have changed a lot. But the uniqueness of India's spiritual heritage is it continues to flourish more or less in its pristine purity. So that's why there's a great statement in the works of the greatest of historians of 20th century, is called Arnold Toynbee. He says, the two unique aspects of ancient civilization, namely antiquity continuity, can only be claimed by the ancient spiritual heritage of India. Antiquity and continuity. In fact, The Vedic civilization that Vivekananda represented in 1893 in the Parliament of Religion existed long before, thousands of years before, Egyptian, Sumerian, or Chinese or Greek civilization came into existence. And Vivekananda was the representative of that ancient heritage. And what did Vivekananda do for our times? His most unique contribution is his contribution to the concept of inter-religious dialogue or inter-religious conversations, as I mentioned earlier. Vivekananda's greatest contribution to world religious thought, the one that he delivered on America's platform, was the concept of universal religion. Now, what is universal religion? If you look at the history of religions, there is not much to be proud of, and there is a lot to be ashamed of. That's true. In the midst of the greatest spiritual ideas, very often many social injustices, many cobwebs, many undesirable things crept into religion for which the founders of religions were not responsible. But in course of time, in its course of evolution, many injustices were casteism in India, the apathy, the Inquisition, the massacres in the name of religion and God that took place in Europe for centuries, and the violence that is still happening in many places all over the world in the name of God and religion. These are not pleasant things to speak about. Vivekananda says there is a solution. We fight in the name of God and religion because we do not look beyond the superficial, the secondary details of religions. If we go to the original scriptures of all world religions, whether it is Hinduism, Buddhism, or Christianity, Judaism, or any religious tradition, Sikhism or Jainism, anything, if we go to the core of the teachings of the great prophets, and if we look beyond the superficial diversities, the secondary details, the socio-anthropological aspects which are comparatively insignificant, if we go to the essence of these world religious scriptures and the teachings of the great prophets and world teachers, you find they speak of the same inner spiritual experience. When we reach the highest level of spiritual aspiration, we go beyond the ceremonies, we go beyond the external practices, we go beyond the confessions, the professions of faith, we go even beyond philosophy, and when we reach the level of experience, we realize the fact that our heart is the permanent residential address of God. God lives in the hearts of everyone, and God is omnipresent. This God, the God that all religions are speaking about, which all prophets and preachers and teachers taught about, is living in the hearts of everyone. God is one divine spiritual reality that is immanent in the whole creation. Once we experience this, we also experience the fact that God is present everywhere. So the immanence and omnipresence and transcendence of the divine reality can only be understood only when we reach the experience dimension of religion, spirituality. That's why Swami Vivekananda defined religion as the manifestation or divinity already in man. It is not something that we invent. It is only that we rediscover. So we may begin our life in the kindergarten of religious education, external practices. I may go to a church, you may go to a temple, another friend may go to another place of worship. Like that, there are differences, diversities at the level of ceremonies and external rituals. And also there are differences at the level of theology. Dogmas and doctrines may vary and differ from tradition to tradition. At the level of philosophy, there are certainly many great common factors. See, as a student, a lifelong student of the Vedas and Upanishads, when I read the works of Eckhart, Meister Eckhart, who was the greatest of the mystics of Middle Ages. I mean, he was born in Germany, he wrote in Old German, and Rudolf Otto had interpreted his philosophy, and Otto's books have been translated into English to become very popular. If you read Eckhart, who lived in the 13th century, you find many of what he wrote were almost translations into Old German of what Shankaracharya wrote in 8th century, and what you find in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, and what later you find in the works of Swami Vivekananda, in the lectures and writings of Swami Vivekananda in 1893 and later on. Because these great teachers who were born in all traditions, who were born in all religious systems, who were actually, in fact, who were the founders of great religious traditions, had reached the experience level, going beyond the ceremonies and rituals, going beyond the theological debates and different views, conflicts of different concepts. When they reach the experience level, then religion becomes spirituality. That's why Vivekananda, in one of his most touching definitions of religion, he said, religion is spirituality. Religion is not a bundle of empty rituals, ceremonies, and external practices. Swamiji said, we may need external practices, no doubt about it. We need, just as every student has to go through the early stages of education, like say kindergarten, primary schools, then college, and finally the higher universities. That's true. We all need. When we reach the university, we don't discern, or we don't we don't discard or disown what we study in the kindergarten. We make use of the same alphabet that we studied in the kindergarten when we reach Stanford or Harvard. No, there's no difference about it. But the point is, we go beyond the lessons that we study in the primary classes when we reach Harvard or Oxford or Stanford, when we reach higher levels of education. Like that, when we reach the experience level, then we cannot really fight with anyone, we cannot quarrel with anyone, because we find the whole creation as one spiritual family. Shankaracharya has an interesting commentary in his beautiful prose, in his commentary on one of the famous verses of Mandukya Karika. It's called Gaudapada Karika. Gaudapada lived in the 6th century, 6th century AD, and Shankaracharya wrote a commentary. Gaudapada's Karika is a commentary on Mandukya Upanishad in 215 verses, and Mandukya Upanishad is only very small text. Now, Swasiddhanta Vivasthasu Dvaitino Nischida Dridham Parasparam Viruddhyante Taihi Ayam Na Viruddhyate. This is the verse from Mandukya Karika. It's called Gaudapada Karika. People who confirmed their religious life, rituals and ceremonies, who believe in duality. God is sitting there somewhere and is supervising me. God is my friend, not your friend. So I have a special understanding with God, but that God won't bother about you. This view, which is the hallmark of dualism, duality, they fight among themselves. Then Shankaracharya says, those who have reached the highest level of spiritual experience, the mystics, the Jesus, the Buddha, the Eckhart and Guru Nanak, or the sages of Shankaracharya, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, Vivekananda, all the great spiritual teachers and mystics of the world, those who have realized the spiritual unity and oneness of creation and humanity, they don't fight among themselves. How can they fight? Shankaracharya says, Taihi anyona virodhibhihi asmadiyoyam vaidiko dharma na viruddhide yadha sukhasta padadibhi. See, you cannot fight with your own hands. You try to give a blow on your head with your hand, you will be hurt. Like that, we cannot do any harm to anybody. We cannot hurt anybody in the name of religion and God, because when we reach the essence of religious experience, we find God is present everywhere and God is present in everything and everybody. So this spiritual unity of creation and existence, not only humanity, existence. In fact, a spiritually enlightened person cannot cut down trees and destroy forests. So the unity of spiritual oneness extends beyond even the human family. It touches, it embraces the whole existence, the whole creation. This unity, this spiritual oneness, this experience that there is no other in spiritual life is a great concept, and Swami Vivekananda's greatest contribution to our times, and his message for the 21st century is this: spiritually we are one. So frequently in the teachings of Vivekananda, you find two approaches. On the one hand, Vivekananda defines religion as a manifestation of divinity already in all of us. Now, in that sense, he defines religion as spirituality or spiritual experience, translating this experience into our everyday action, being kind and broad-minded towards the whole humanity and seeing the presence of God among all people whom we come across, with whom we interact in our everyday life. This is what is called the true essence of religion. It's called spirituality. Then in certain contexts, Vivekananda criticizes the conventional definitions of religion. Religion, as is frequently understood, to be more precise, misunderstood. And which misunderstanding is responsible for all the problems that we are facing in the name of religion. What is that? We frequently interpret religion just as a concept, an idea. In that respect, religion is sometimes, it can be called religiosity. There have been many problems in the name of religion. That's because religion was misunderstood or interpreted as mere external profession of faith. But same religion, when it becomes experience going beyond external practices, ceremonies and rituals, when it becomes inner experience, then religion becomes spirituality. Then it becomes a great universal spiritual humanism. This unique paradigm was Vivekananda's great contribution, and that's a message for our times. This spiritual concept is not confined to spiritual life alone. Look at Vivekananda's concept of harmony and synthesis of different cultures and civilizations. And that is very pertinent for our times. See, Swami Vivekananda says, for example, we can learn from every culture. We can learn from every tradition. So in one context, long before the Indian diaspora migration started flowing towards European countries or America or Canada, Vivekananda makes a statement: what we need today is a harmonious blending of the best of the Occidental and the best of the Oriental. It's a very important harmonious blending, not imitation, but a harmonious synthesis of the best elements of Western culture. Swami Vivekananda was a great admirer, great fan of the great Greco-Roman heritage, which manifests in the form of efficiency, not workaholism, but work efficiency, professionalism, punctuality, positive creative patriotism, not national fanaticism. Again, hygiene, scientific temper, innovative spirit, sense of adventure, sense of self-reliance, and above all, organizational genius, organizational skills, leadership skills, which were the hallmarks of Western culture. Swami Vivekananda was expressing all these views when India, as most of India was under British rule. And he says, We have to learn from every culture. There are some people in India, Swamiji points out, that, oh, we have got everything in our Vedas and Puranas and everything, so we need not worry about science and technology. Swamiji was a strong critic of this extreme orthodox view. Swamiji said, we need science and technology. We need modern education. He was the only, mayhap the first great teacher to expound and to become the prophet of the need for secular education. Something very interesting, not Sanskrit or Vedanta. Of course, later Swami Vivekananda says, along with secular education, along with scientific and technological education, we also need our ancient spiritual culture. But culture cannot walk and act. Culture needs a society that's well organized, a society that is economically self-reliant, prosperous, a society which does not neglect the women folk, a society which promotes education of the poor and downtrodden. So Swami Vivekananda says we have to make the best use of the fruits of Greco-Roman heritage, the scientific temperament, and many other things. Of course, in this context, we must say India was once upon a time home to the greatest of modern mathematicians and scientists. Look at Varahamihira, Bhaskara, Charaga, Susruta, the great medical scientists of ancient times, mathematicians, Aryabhatta, Bhaskara, Varahamihira, the great astronomers and mathematicians, physicists of ancient times. But Vivekananda said, in modern times, and that is true today also, what we need is a synthesis of the best of Western culture, the efficiency and professionalism, leadership skills, and scientific temperament, innovative spirit, all these great skills. But along with that, we have to preserve our ancient tradition. See, India has its own great heritage, mostly which manifests in the form of wonderful values of family life. I can just quote one convocation address from Taittiriya Upanishad. After studying Vedas for 12 years, a student is going back to his home to marry and to become a part of social family structure. So the teacher addresses the student, gives him a set of instructions that will be helpful to him to become a happy husband, wife, or parent, whatever may be. This is Matrudevo Bhava, Pitrudevo Bhava, Acharya Devo Bhava, Diti Devo Bhava, all this. Your parents should be as honorable to you as God Himself. So also your guests, your teachers. So you should perform your duty properly as an ideal member of the family structure. Such a sacred heritage, which is part of our Oriental culture. Swamiji says this should be kept intact. This great spirit, the treasure, which is India's contribution to the world. At the same time, that should not make us obscurantist or just insular. We should not make them too proud to the extent of becoming insular. We should also keep our doors and windows open to learn from other civilizations and other cultures. That's why Swamiji says what we need today is a harmonious blending, harmonious synthesis of the best of the Western and best of India's or best of the Oriental cultures, Swami says. That will help us to become a very healthy society which is prosperous, which is educated, and will be able to bring the masses from the low levels of poverty, illiteracy, and social backwardness and make the country strong and prosperous, Vivekananda says. So Swami Vivekananda was a great prophet of cultural synthesis, spiritual synthesis. He, on the one hand, he preached this ideal of universal spiritual humanism. It's called a universal religion. We have to look beyond the doctrines and dogmas. We have to focus on the essential teachings of the great scriptures of the world. Then you find all the great teachers were talking about the spiritual unity of creation, of existence.